portalsofknowing.com presents This Just In with Karen Christine Patrick. Hi, this is Karen. Today, what's on my mind is the experiencer movement. I'm in a position to have an interesting perspective because I've had life circumstances that allowed me to see other movements and how they relate to the experiencer movement. And it was struck me yesterday listening to two researchers talk about somebody else who I know personally, who I know the story of personally, and then come to the conclusion that this person is under some form of mind control. And I always like to joke, yeah, where did you hear about mind control? Did you hear it on TV? You know, back to your regularly scheduled programming right there. But I wanted to talk about where the experiencer movement is and the supposed crisis of ufology, which there's been a lot of infighting and crises in ufology lately, particularly highlighted by what's going on in MUFON, where some people, very good people I know, have quit MUFON over some of the actions and attitudes of the leadership of MUFON. And MUFON's so big, it's complicated, and I won't say if it's good or bad or anything. It's whatever you get out of it. If you're in it, great. Maybe you see something in there that you need. I'm all for it. I personally have not really found a connection to MUFON. I've tried a couple times. It just didn't click with me. Primarily because I saw right away that a lot of the membership seemed to be there to research the topic, to be an investigator, but to have so much of a debunkery attitude or pseudo-skeptical. I'm not going to give them skeptic because I haven't seen too many actual skeptics. And if you want to know more about pseudo-skepticism, you go Google a guy by the name of Marcello Truzzi, Truzzi, and what he said about it, because he, I think, said rightly that real skepticism is a great mind tool. You sit back and you go, I'm going to observe this thing objectively, hear out everything and try to figure out if this thing I'm hearing, what does it mean to me, more or less. But to not make a conclusion until you have all the evidence. Obviously, that's a mind tool of science that people talk about. But I think pseudo-skepticism falls in the range of, I already made up my mind. For instance, what a lot of experiencers go through is, I've already made up my mind, there's no such thing as aliens, therefore don't confuse me with the facts. Or there's no such thing as UFOs, there's no such thing, right? And then they bring in a whole range of people to support what it is that they're saying. And the problem with that is they're not even listening in the first place to the information. And, if you say, hey, I think there is aliens, or I had this experience, or I saw a UFO, now they're not going to be talking to you about the experience itself, but they're going to be talking to you about you. Like, should I listen to you? Are you credible or not? So if you're just an average person, you have less credibility, and they throw that word around a lot, than someone who is like a first responder or military or something like that. And I think they miss a lot of information. They miss a lot of data as a result of, already making up their mind. So that's pseudo-skepticism. You're not a real skeptic. You're not really objectively, hearing something out. You're somebody who's already made up your mind, and you're now going to skew the information based on your prejudice. So that's an issue. And so for experiencers, I've come to my own personal philosophy that I kind of don't care about skeptics, pseudo-skeptics, non-believers, or debunkers. Don't care anymore. Can't get anywhere with that because I'm not one of them. I'm an experiencer. And I'm stuck with the fact that there's these odd bits of data and experience sticking in my timeline that I've got to figure out for myself. For myself, not for everybody, for myself, what does that mean? And so I'm not really needing to apply science, but more like philosophy, it's or observation, or just whatever tools we use to get through our daily lives to make sense of the world. And that's why I talk a lot about the experiencer path to disclosure, or the idea that the phenomenon itself really can't be pinned down by science. Science, right off the bat, requires repeatability, and I just don't, except for some patterns of similarity, I don't really see that someone can recreate these kinds of experiences in a lab and say, okay, that phenomenon is real. These are experiences. This is one of a kind snowflake thing in your life, and different for everyone. If someone sees a UFO, they're the kind of UFO they saw, where they saw it, time of day, its impact on them, did a being come out of it? All of those variables are different for each person. What they think it was, how they felt about it. Did they have a good experience? Did they have a bad experience? Not exactly repeatable, because it's an individualized event, by nature. So that creates the vacuum where science isn't, but manifest reality is, or even perception. So there's other tools. You can't just use one toolbox for everything. Science isn't, we should recognize the limitations of science. Science does some cool stuff, but the cool stuff they do is based on their observation of nature, so it's really about nature, right? Somebody goes, everything we get that's cool is from science, and I go, nature. If we have a particular compound that we discover that cures a disease, that was because that was an herb or a compound or something that they got from nature, and figured out how to put it in a pill and sell it to us for a really high price. But the baseline is we're part of nature, and our cures and our things that we get to help us has got to be somewhat based in nature as well, even if it's the chemistry of nature, right? So where am I going with this? Oh, rise of the experiencer movement. Okay, so we're in this transition from the fact that we have had the ufology experiencer movement defined by experts, and that's interesting because I went through that before myself. I'm a proud survivor of domestic violence and verbal abuse and all kinds of things like that kept me pretty shut down as a woman, as a human, and I watched that movement change. So when I was first having those experiences with domestic abuse, it was in a context of when I went to go get help, the only help that was kind of available was law enforcement based, and the counseling services, it's all expert based. So they didn't even call it domestic abuse, they call it battered woman syndrome. So they blame the women for being battered. Like, you're so stupid, you're being battered. Rather than looking at the baseline social problems that we have that lead up to that, disempowerment of women, psychopathy and sociopathic behavior, violence in our community. There's really a complex set of issues that eventually end up as domestic abuse, and we didn't really get any headway as far as helping women and also changing the laws about all of this until the people experiencing it. So the women and the children and the men, all of the people who were experiencers of it, first of all, said we've got to make people safe and hide them. So I actually ended up in that system briefly, while I was pulling away from my perpetrator. And when I first tried to get away, there was no help like that for me. And then the second time I got lots of help and I was able to get away from the situation. It turned out to be just as bad as you'd think it would be. When you leave, that's part of the reason why people go back, is when they leave, it's so horrible. That's the most dangerous time. So I was so supported by people who'd been through that. I was told it wasn't my fault. I was told that there's no making somebody like that happy. You can't be in control of that, because that's that person's choices to be violent. That's them. They're a perpetrator. That's choices that they're making. You didn't make them mad. They made themselves mad. That sort of thing. So I got counseling. I got support. I got support groups. I got a chance to get away. I got some help with some housing. I even was in a program that was hiding my address for my perpetrator. So when we were going through the divorce and all the stuff that requires you to give an address, I was able to give an address that was set up by the state. I was in Washington State at the time. They set up a program where all the mail to and from the outside world and you had an in-between address, and then they would turn around, package all that up, and send it to my real address. And that was really good because the perpetrator I had happened to be a hacker, so I had to really hide, my information for a while till he got tired of me and moved on to the next victim. Yeah, there you go. So, so that's the difference. The change eventually becomes that the minority person ends up being taken from being that the experts are the ones helping you, and it's very distasteful to them, and they don't understand it because they're not in it to the system being created by and for the people having the experience. And I strongly believe that's what's going to happen with this whole topic of ufology and contact and experiencers and abductees, and the whole thing is that we're not being even viewed correctly by the experts. We're looked at, if they have a conference and they have an experiencers breakout, and I think those are great. It's to help the poor experiencers, which, when I look around the room like that, I see strong individuals. I really see people who are strong. They have managed to take this experience and, hold their own in spite of ridicule and everything else, to say, hey, I have this experience. It's real for me. You don't get to tell me what this is, And so all the way from people sitting there who are feeling a lot of fear and frustration and social ostracization. And I really do think that there's many experiences are negative, but I think having them and the risk of other people finding out is actually the core of the trauma. It's like you're going through something, and that's even worse than the thing itself sometimes, is that you're not supported, or people won't listen to you, or they won't believe you, or you're crazy if you say anything after that. So it's a societal pressure. So the society has to change. Like, we've had other minority groups, the gay people, civil rights and all of that. I don't know how, if you ask someone in those groups what they've been through, maybe we're not even there yet for those issues, but at least they've developed their own support systems to deal with the fact that they're rejected and ridiculed and marginalized and abused. So we don't even have that baseline as a group yet as for experiencers. We don't have coalitions and lobbies and things like that to even deal with the government aspect, which is completely intertwined with this topic, because the government has been the one who has a lot of information they don't share, and then lies about that they even have it. So, I've seen them do it. I've seen government operatives act like, oh, there's nothing there. I mean, we don't even know what you're talking about. We're talking to you guys, and it's bullshit. So I know that just straight up from what I know about NASA alone, the manipulation and the mind manipulation that they put around topics, so that they put words and concepts around something so you can't even articulate or say words to say, this is an experience and this is what happened to me. It takes a while to find the words even to be able to say that, and it really helps when you hear somebody else. So I was helped to start a mutual support group in my area for experiencers, and I have Whitley Strieber to thank for that. I never did read the book Communion. Every time I picked it up, I freaked out. Finally, I saw the movie. I saw him and his wife go to an experiencer meeting, and I said to myself, oh, I want to go to one of those, because then I couldn't find one in my area. So I realized I was going to have to help start one, which I was able to do. And it's a wonderful experience. But yeah, this is the change. The change is going to be between the experiencer is going to become its own movement. It's going to have its own resources, and the expert class is going to have to be educated. That's what happened with law enforcement in relation to domestic abuse, is that they had to be educated. They had their everyday view of it based on dealing with events, crimes that happen, but they needed to be educated about other aspects. And that process, I've watched that process happen, and I believe the same thing is going to happen, is that if they get some humility and realize this is happening to people, and it's not their job to decide who's real and who isn't, or even my job to decide who's real and who isn't. Our job is just to listen, observe, communicate, advocate, and I don't want to join in the vilification of any particular person. Now, some people, I think, I'm not sure why they're saying what they're saying. I, in fact, know that some people are being used to spread disinformation about things as well, and they may not know it. I may not know I'm doing the same thing. So that's just part of the observation. And I get people asking me, well, do you think so-and-so is telling the truth? And it's like, well, the point isn't my deciding that someone's telling the truth. The point is to listen to all these stories, and the patterns will come out of these stories. But I think the most important story is your own. That's your own. You were there. Nobody else was there. You were there. So get into your own story. If you're listening to me, you probably have one. So thank you for listening.